Welcome to the World Away.
Travel tales to inspire your wanderlust.
Welcome back to the World Awaits. I hope you've had a wonderful week, everyone. And before we kick off this episode, we have another competition. Woohoo! It is for a night stay at Moxie Sydney Airport Hotel, because we do love a good airport hotel.
Oh, and it's such a fun-looking hotel as well. It is not your typical boring transit dive. The prize is a night stay at the hotel, a welcome drink on arrival, buffet breakfast for two at Moxie Kitchen, and here's the absolute clincher, up to 14 nights free valet parking at the hotel. So you could stay for the one night and then disappear on holidays without having to pay parking. It is absolutely incredible. The total package is worth $350. That's excluding the parking, I believe. And you have a year to redeem the stay.
Yes, amazing prize. And unlike Melbourne Airport, Sydney's is now basically City Airport because it's only 2 stops from Central by train. And it also makes the most of being an airport hotel because this hotel, you can lie in bed and watch the planes.
I am geek me up now. Absolutely. To enter the competition, simply like, follow and tag. So jump onto the competition post on our Instagram or Facebook page at the World Awaits podcast. Like us and Moxie Sydney Airport. Follow us, and for a bonus entry, tag a friend.
Today, we are chatting about some of our worst and best airline experiences. And if you were listening last week, you would have heard us talking about Roy Morgan's winners of the annual Customer Satisfaction Award and the airlines that ranked the highest. So head on back if you want to have a listen to that, episode 146. But we're going to kick right in because Belle has got a great worst airline experience to tell you.
Oh my goodness, I do. Well, look, can I say my absolute worst was that flight with Ural Air in southern Russia, where water ran down the interior walls of the cabin. The flight attendants screamed at us for taking photos. They're like, "Niet, niet." And when somebody says no in Russian, it just seems, it's kind of one of those languages where they really mean no. Definitely my most unsafe flight, although we did arrive on time. But my most recent tricky flight was with Virgin Australia. So back here on home soil, I did actually write it up for the Canberra Times and it did go a bit ballistic. The flight was delayed 6 hours due to broken air conditioning. Look, that cannot be helped, although the timing was unfortunate because I was flying from Perth to Melbourne. So it meant instead of taking off mid-afternoon, we didn't get going until 10:30 at night. So we got into Melbourne at 4:30 in the morning, and I've got to say, nobody looks good at 4:30 in the morning. Look, that can't be helped. Things break, you've got to wait, okay? But the thing that got me most about this flight was that all up, for that leg, it cost me $900 to fly from Perth to Melbourne. It was insane. So I had an international cancellation of my connecting flight. So then I had to change the Virgin one. I had to pay to change the flight. Okay, a $99 change fee, I can cop that. Then I had to pay the fare difference of the seat from when I originally was going to fly to what it was going to cost now. The fare difference was more than $460. So that's on top of the original fare of about $450. So the total fare was like $900. And that, my friends, is what we in the business call price gouging. So, Kirstie, if you're going to take away a lesson from this, and in this instance, it was unavoidable for me, that is to book all, if you've got a number of flights in sequence, try to book them all on the one carrier so that when one flight fails, which is why I had my flight from South Africa back to Australia was delayed by a day, they have to honour the connecting flights. So it is a motto that I live by, to always keep them on the one, to try to fly the one carrier. But sometimes when companies are booking flights for you, it just doesn't happen and it's out of your hands. And that is a price you pay. And that is a very steep price. And I'm just waiting to hear back from my travel insurer as to whether they will compensate me, because $900 for a flight from Perth to Melbourne is not on, my friends.
Yeah, that's bad. That is really hard, and you're right. That's a really good lesson. Is that to learn and to take on board is to look at booking through the one. Yeah, if you can do that, book through the one carrier. So, well, my worst one has to probably be nothing like water coming through the airline, which which would worry me. Although there's been some pretty dubious internal flights, I have to say, on small airlines around the world. But probably one of my worst experiences was when we were flying Jetstar, and we were actually lined up to go with the whole family to go to Thailand, and they cancelled the flight literally while we had been in the queue for like an hour lining up. They just cancelled it. The board just came up saying cancelled. And then they put us up in this really shoddy, like faulty towers type airport hotel, which was not a fun experience at all. The lesson in that one was have travel insurance locked in before you go, because if you obviously get it later, then you're not covered. But we lost a night on in Thailand at this really expensive, beautiful hotel we were staying at, called Rocks, which was amazing. But it was really expensive. So the lesson there was, if you book travel insurance, then you'll get the money back, on that particular experience, my husband booked travel insurance with one person and then forgot and booked travel insurance somewhere else. And we actually got the money back from both.
No.
Yes, we did. So I don't know if you're meant to do that, but there you go. So anyway, so that was good, because it was like $980 a night or something. We had this incredible apartment in Thailand. So yeah, that was probably one of the worst experiences, only because having young kids and all that, it makes it really challenging. Previously, we had an experience where we booked through Webjet when the kids were really little, and we were going to Singapore. And I've talked about this before, but we got to the airport and realised that my youngest son at the time was a baby. It was like two days off his, not having 6 months on his passport, and so they wouldn't let us fly. And I had to fly up to Sydney, because at that time we weren't Australian citizens and we were on New Zealand passports, and so I had to book a flight to Sydney, go to Sydney, get the passport, come back. And do you think we could get a person on Webjet someone to talk to? Oh my God, it was such a nightmare trying to change our flights. It was just the worst. I would never do it again. So I have always booked direct. And I usually try and avoid Jetstar purely because of the reason. I actually find Virgin usually for me have been historically pretty good. And it's Jetstar who tend to always cancel the flights. But I'm sure everyone listening out there has had a shocking flight experience, and probably many much worse than that. So we would love to hear from you. So do drop us a line at hello@theworldawaits.au. So what's been your best flight experience, Belle?
Well, pretty much anything in business, but I wasn't quite sure whether we had to limit this to economy or not. I mean, my best business, I think my best business experience is a bit of an outlier here. And I think that's going to be, it's going to be Cathay Pacific, because it's the flag carrier for Hong Kong. The food is incredible. The wine service, amazing. And if you are flying through Hong Kong airport and you stay at their lounges, which have actually just had a refurb, so they were fabulous before those refurbs. They're just phenomenal. They just have lounges dedicated, things like the tea lounge where you just go and drink beautiful teas, and the champagne lounge, and then there's like the party lounge that looks over the tarmac and stuff. So you have an incredible flight, and then when you're in transit, you have an incredible experience. But that's business. Does that really count? So I was thinking about some of my best economy, and I reckon any economy where you get 3 seats where you can lie down in the middle is going to be the best one. And I did have that experience recently with Garuda. Look, their planes are shocking old bangers, but gorgeous food. I mean, the beef rendang, love it. But possibly my best flight is, there's been some incredible ones like flying into Bhutan and stuff like that, but their food is dreadful. But maybe my flight with Qantas flying from Melbourne to Dubai, my first flight after COVID, because we were trapped for 2 years. We hadn't seen family for 3 years. I think there was Wagyu on the menu or something like that. And we're in economy and everybody was just so happy. The staff, people were actually tearing up on the flight. Us, the staff, everybody. I was saying to the staff in the galley, how happy are you to be back? And they would, we were all actually really emotional and it was beautiful. And then we got to stretch out and have a couple of seats to ourselves here and there. So I think, that one makes me all warm in my heart for my best economy flight. But what about you, Kirstie?
Yeah, I mean, look, business is obviously the best experience, hands down. And I haven't flown first.
Well, no. Have you flown
So no, I haven't actually. My husband has. He got upgraded. He used to fly a lot for work. Um, and yes, no, I haven't actually. I wish I had. So anyway, so my best would probably. I'll just talk about my best recent, sort of fairly recently. So I flew on Air Tahiti Nui's new Manava Premium class, which is their upgraded sort of premium economy experience. But gosh, it was good. It was really good. I was really impressed. I did not expect the sort of level of service we had. The seats were really good. There was lots of space. You get when you fly with the that on that particular class, which is new, you get access to fast security check lanes, priority boarding, and you can take two 23-kilogram bags, which is good if you're going to do some shopping. Not that you'd have time because you'd be spending all your time lazing around in the tropics. There's also champagne and multiple meal options and cute little amenities, like you get bamboo socks and an adjustable bamboo eye mask and toothbrush and earplugs, those sorts of things. And there's only 35 seats in that little curtained off section, so the service is really good. So I really loved that. I actually was very impressed with Air Tahiti Nui. I absolutely loved that flight. Then I am going to just give a little shout out for Qantas, because I flew earlier this month when was it? April, to Melbourne to Chicago with Qantas. And I have to say, I was really impressed with that flight. I mean, it was economy, so it was, the seat wasn't fantastic. But I did actually get up. I did ask very kindly if I could come up the plane a little bit. So I did get under a bulkhead, which was nice because I had the extra leg room and I didn't have to pay for it. But I have to say, the main standout point for me with Qantas was, well, one, the food's not that bad. I mean, look, it was airline food. I mean, I love how they all talk about they all work with celebrity chefs, and I'm kind of like, yeah, that isn't very demonstrated very well in the economy. But I have to say, the best thing about it was I was sitting next to a woman who was blind, and she passed out. And I think I mentioned this in an episode before, you may have heard, but before she passed out, they were so attentive to her. They were putting tape on the screen so that she could find out where to call for service. And they were always coming up and checking on her regularly. And when she did pass out, they had oxygen there immediately. They were even more attentive than they were before. And gosh, I was impressed with the staff. The staff were exceptional. I think probably the best staff and the best experience I've had of seeing exceptional staff on a flight. So well done to Qantas.
God, I can't believe Qantas has got 2 gongs for that one, right? I'm not going to mention the time when they wouldn't ring me back and I got stuck in Dubai for 2 weeks. Let's just leave that one. There we go. Best, worst, love it all.
If you'd like to help support our production costs, you can buy us a coffee at coffee.com/theworldawaits. That's ko-fi.com/theworldawaits, so we can continue to bring you inspirational travel interviews with the world's best.
This week, I'm talking to Dianne Whelan, adventurer and filmmaker who, at 50, set out to walk and kayak the longest trail in the world, the 24,000-kilometre-long Trans-Canada Trail. Her film 500 Days in the Wild opened recently in Australia and documents her extraordinary 6-year journey.
Amazing. Can't wait to hear about that. So did you catch her when she was in Australia, Belle?
Yeah, well, she was she was in Perth, and just on this absolute whirlwind tour of the country. And even if you catch the trailer is just so inspirational. As I said, she was 50 when she started. She wasn't and still isn't an elite athlete. She's just a woman who needed some peace, quiet, and a realignment of priorities. And she achieved it in the most incredible way, but she's just so warm. She's so giving and funny. And she told me actually that her next project is going to involve puffins. I love puffins. They are like my spirit bird animal thing, because I think my animal is maybe Samoyeds. But take a listen, because I know you are going to love this interview. Dee, welcome to The World Awaits. It's so exciting to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Belle.
So let's start off with just a little about yourself, where you live and what your life was like when you decided to walk the world's longest trail route.
Okay, I live actually, interestingly enough, on a place called the Sunshine Coast. in British Columbia, Canada. Where I live is actually about 2.5 hours north of Vancouver. As the crow flies, it's on the mainland, but on the coast. But you have to actually take a ferry to get there because there's a lot of ocean fjords, and so to get across those, we use a ferry. We don't have highways or bridges to take you there. It's a couple of acres there, and I converted, with the help of my partner, it's been converted a few times, an old chicken shed into my studio. So it's also where I work. I work there and I live there. I have a server so I can work with creative people wherever they are on my films. So that's my home. When I left on this journey, I had been married and my marriage ended after 13 years. And my dog of 16 years had died. So everything that tethered me to one spot was gone. And of course, I was very sad about these changes. But there was another part of me that went, well, there's this trail. You need a new film. And you've been to Everest and you've been to the Arctic and the North Pole. And this is a new trail in Canada that's calling itself the longest trail in the world. And it's just about to open and it's never been done. Maybe this is the opportunity to go. So for it kind of ticked off both professional boxes and deeply personal boxes. Yeah, that's how that all came about.
Yeah, right. And so just a collision of luck, bad luck, good luck, and is everybody. Yeah. So tell us just do a rough overview of the Trans-Canada Trail, where it starts and where it finishes.
You bet. The Trans-Canada Trail is now over 30,000 kilometers because it's added trails that kind of come off the main line. But when I left in 2015, I wanted to just do one continuous line. And so that amounted to 24,000 kilometer trail and 487 different land and water trails stitched together to create this longest recreational trail in the world. And 16,000 kilometers, I would have to ride a mountain bike, hike, snowshoe in the winter months. And then 8,000 kilometers were water trails that I would paddle, which included, Lake Superior and a 4,000 kilometer paddle to the Arctic Ocean. So yeah, that was probably the part I was most afraid of, was that long solitude. Lake Superior, I was on that lake for a few months by myself, paddling, and it's, I think, one of the largest lakes in the world, and it's like an ocean, and I was really quite terrified of that. But as it turns out, the paddling turned out to be my favorite part. Those are the most ancient trails, the water trails, and they're in the most wilderness parts of the trails because you go where there's no roads and no access for people. So yeah, they're the most remote.
So did you do the whole trip nonstop? You never left the path on those 6 years?
For the 6 years, the trail was my home.
Mm.
But there were, it's even in the film, at the end of my second year, I'm caught out in the wild by a sudden winter storm, and I'm in a canoe, and actually a friend of mine was with me for a few weeks at that point. And we suddenly wake up in the morning and we're like, uh-oh, the water is now ice. Mm. And we are very much stranded in the middle of nowhere. So eventually we cut a trail, we get out. She goes home. I go back in, grab all the gear, bring all of it out, and I end up staying off the trail at that point for a month in a cabin. And I would say, on average, I spent 10 and a half to 11 months a year on the trail, and probably a month nestled somewhere, not always wherever I could find. In some cases, it was on an island where I got an artist residency. And so that was actually off the trail. But then I carried a GPS that sent a ping every 10 minutes. So I would just simply come back to the place that I departed the trail to resume it. But taking that month off was quite necessary. I didn't think I would do that in the beginning, and I didn't do that in the beginning. But after the second year, I did because, it was a much longer journey and I had to organize myself. I had to plot out some logistics, find the indie filmmakers. And as I mentioned to you, I only approached it one trail at a time. And that was my superpower because the more planning you do, the more rigid you become attached to the plan that you've invested so much time into. And so, for instance, like I could have rigidly attached myself to a plan and like, okay, I'm going to be doing this section in the summer and that section in the winter. And then as it turned out, no, it didn't work out that way. I was showing up in a completely different season. So all that prep work would have been for naught. So it was the best way to do it was actually the way I did it, which was just making it manageable, smaller steps, break it into many, many, many smaller parts. Have your eye on the end, but very much live in the present and just focus on it. 3-month increments essentially is what I did. I think 3 months at a time.
Yeah, wow. And what was the longest period of time that you went without seeing another person?
A couple months, probably on Lake Superior. Probably it was close to 2 months, maybe. It's hard to say. Again, I wasn't counting days out there, but I'll tell you for sure that I had some trepidation before I went that I might be lonely,
Mm.
and I was never lonely. It's kind of a scene in the film as well, but humans are just 0.01% of all life on Earth. 0.1%. So when you are out there, you begin to connect to the other 99.9%. And time in Indigenous communities as I cross Canada listening and learning. And so I'll give you one quick story, and I promise it'll be quick. But near the beginning of my journey, as I finished my first paddle, I'm greeted on the shore by this man named Chief Ben Sillyboy. He's the Grand Chief of the Mi'kmaq people, and they're the Indigenous people on the east coast of North America, basically. And I'm so like, hi, I'm traveling the old way, no motors. And he looks at me with a big smile and he's like, well, Dianne, that's not really the old way for us. He goes like, the old way for us isn't how you travel. It's what you carry in your heart as you travel. He said, our people have been doing these kinds of vision journeys for thousands of years. And, when we go on them, with each step on the earth, we say the earth is sacred. The earth is sacred. And when we're in our canoes and we're paddling, with every stroke in the water, we say the water is sacred. The water is sacred. And he said, if you do that, you will be safe on your journey. And that is traveling the old way. Well, I listened to that. And I'm not saying, Belle, that I did it every second of every day, but whenever I was afraid, I did. So if I was in the woods and I could hear sounds and it was dark, or I just suddenly found myself feeling fear, instead of feeding the fear, I would, the earth is sacred, the earth is sacred, the earth is sacred. I kind of got into a mantra with just the earth is sacred, the earth is sacred. And what happened gradually over time was that fear of something became a connection with something. When I left on the journey, I had no funding for this film. I gave up my home. I sold my car to finance my first year on the trail. It's not expensive living in your tent and eating meal. You can live quite inexpensively, but nevertheless, and then after the first year I got grants. But oddly, yeah, the film was made with human kindness, like strangers that I met along the way who shared food, water, gave me a shower at their home if I was going through a small town or something. I mean, just so much kindness, really. And so it's so amazing to me because it's been almost 10 years now from the day I started, that it's still sustaining itself that way, you know?
It's defined a decade of your life. That's quite astonishing, actually. Yeah.
It's my entire 50s. I left when I turned 50 and I'm 60 now. So it's like an entire decade of my life, this project. Yeah. But as far as how I survived out there, it's not that difficult, honestly. I mean, it's another way of living that you become accustomed to. It's not about, like, for instance, like before I used to read the news all the time, and I do again now that I'm out. But out there it just became irrelevant. So what becomes more imperative is the information from your immediate environment at all times. Like, what's the wind doing? Is it going to rain? What's the temperature? Or like, what's watching the trees, watching the surface of water. Are there animal prints in the mud around me or in the earth around me? Like becoming very aware of that. That's what's important. And so it's a whole rewiring of the brain. And it's not about making money. It's not about paying bills anymore. It's about finding water. I had a water filter with me, so you'd have to find water either that needed to be filtered or that was clean water. And I never knew from day to day where I'd be camping at the end of that day. So at some point, finding home, finding a place to put up my tent. So, and of course, I'm a woman, so of course I went out there terrified that some mean person man would people are like, there's that saying, right? Are you more frightened of bears or are you more frightened of the man? And I mean, we're just so wired as women to be frightened when we're alone in the middle of nowhere by the man, and a tent does not have a lock on the door, so you're very vulnerable. And I left feeling, I mean, I'm a professional filmmaker. I've made films on Mount Everest. I've made a documentary in the high Arctic. So making a documentary on the longest trail in the world wasn't that far-fetched. But on a personal level, I'd been married for 13 years and my marriage had ended and my dog of 16 years had died. So when I went out there, I was also on a personal healing journey. What I like to say, I was checking out to check in. And so, yeah, I was kind of disenchanted with the world at that point. I was like, oh, God, it just feels like the psychopaths have taken the reins of power. And there's a line in the film that's near the beginning that says, we used to live in an society and now we live in an economy. And I was very much feeling that way, and so I really just wanted to be alone in nature for a while. And yet, over all those years, I never met one mean person. All I met from strangers, whether they were hunters in the middle of the night in a storm or in indigenous communities where I went to listen and learn as I traveled across this massive country and land that I live on in Canada, all I met was kindness. And so that narrative had to change. It's like I had to remember, oh, yeah, the world is full of kind people. And we put shadow on the front page of our newspapers and our lead stories in the news, but that is not reality. That is a part of the story. And we are always wired to wanting to know about the dangers that are around us. And there's for good reason, but it's a distortion and it's easy to lose sight of that, And so what the journey really showed me was that, the world is full of kind people. And I've experienced that here in Australia as well, 8 weeks, hundreds of people in different screenings and just the amount of kindness and openness and warm people. I mean, it just gives me a lot of hope, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think I do know what you mean. I think if you've traveled any length of time out of your comfort zone, then I'm with you. I'm on the same page as you. I think kindness and it has to be that narrative. We have to be hopeful as well, because otherwise times do get dark and we do let ourselves into that run down that rabbit hole, I guess. Tell me about the bear.
Sure. Well, first of all, I will preface it that I saw many, many, many bears. And let's say I'm going to use this number quite randomly because I didn't exactly count them. Let's say I saw 60 bears in my journey. Only one posed a danger and a threat to me. So I always like to give that context because bears they're actually quite incredible animals. You watch them with their young, you watch them when they're feeding and have these massive claws, and yet they very gently take these berries off the plant and eat them. And do you know what I mean? They were curious or indifferent to my presence. So they weren't a threat. But yes, there was one bear that I met. So it was year 4 of my journey and I was on a paddle. So I'll give you a bit of context too. The trail is 24,000 kilometers long that I did, and 8,000 kilometers of that was in a canoe. And it's a trail that's made up of 487 different trails. And Some of the 16,000 of them were land trails and 8,000 were water trails. So I was on the 8,000 kilometer, I was on a water trail that's actually 4,000 kilometers that goes from northern Alberta in Canada up to the Arctic Ocean. So I was above the Arctic Circle at that time. And I was actually with a friend who's now my partner, Louisa. And so she had joined me for that section of the paddle of the journey. So we got a message on the satellite phone one morning that a man in front of us who was canoeing, I think he was from France, his name was Julian. He'd been taken out of his tent at 3:30 in the morning by a grizzly bear and eaten. And this made international news. But of course, we're out in the middle of nowhere, so we didn't know that. And I guess what made it very concerning was that in the 4 months that we had already been paddling to the Arctic, we had never seen one person in a canoe or kayak. We met a few hunters that were on a little speedboat at one point, some indigenous hunters who gave us some fresh meat. But we hadn't seen anybody. So we knew, and the message that came through was that, oh my gosh, this has just happened. It's all over the news and you're right where it happened. So all of a sudden, this very physical journey became a very psychological one. Now, before we left on that paddle, Louisa had said to me, I think we should have a gun for this section, going up to the Arctic. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. I don't want to bring a gun. Like, I haven't carried any weapons, and that's why I'm not drawing that energy into this journey. And she said, well, what's the plan if a bear attacks one of us? I'm like, good point. Okay, let's get the gun license. Let's bring a gun for this section, because in the high Arctic, there are no people. You must save yourself. Like, on any journey, you must take that responsibility. There isn't this magic people that are going to just show up to save you. You have to save yourself. So I honored her fear. We went and spent a weekend just before we started paddling, and we got our gun license, or we did our gun course or whatever, so that we could legally carry a firearm. And we got a gun. And it was a 12-gauge shotgun, which we periodically would pull out from the bottom of the canoe and just fire a shot. And of course, it always just threw both of us way back. Like, it's a big, we weren't exactly marksmen of any sort. But anyway, we had this thing. We taught ourselves how to use it safely. And it was stored at the bottom of the canoe. Well, after we hear this news, Louisa gets on the satellite phone and she phones the RCMP. It's just got they're the police up there, and they have a small detachment, probably 1,000 miles from where we were, but we knew that they would be the ones responding to the incident. And we just said, hey, can you give us some info on this? Like, was the bear killed? Like, what happened? And they're like, yeah, no, the bear's still out there. Do you have a gun? Well, she's like, yes. They go, take it out. Put the safety on and have it next to you at all times. The bears are really bad this year. And we're like, oh, great. So we pull up, that's what happened. We got the gun, and sure enough, 2 weeks later, I'm in the tent. I'm like just trying to find my clothes at this point in the morning. And Louisa's outside the tent and she's like, there's a bear and it's coming into our camp. And it was trying to sneak in, and she heard it snap a branch. And so we both knew, oh, that's not good, right? Like, that's not a good sign. Like, normally they would see us and they would leave, not come in. So I said, grab the gun. So the first 2 bullets in the shotgun are called birdshot. They're not actually meant to hurt the bear. They're meant to frighten the bear. And then the third one would be meant to hurt the bear. So she fires the first one and the bear keeps coming. Now we really know this is not a friendly bear. And at this point, I grab my camera because, well, that's what I am. I'm a filmmaker. So I'm putting on my pants and I've grabbed my little GoPro and I'm like, holy shit. And so we have the scene is in the film, and I'm like, okay, fire another shot because the bear has not stopped. And she fires a second shot, another bird shot, and the bear sits down and watches us. So I'm like, okay. And she's like, we just got to go. Let's just hop in the canoe. And I'm like, yeah, no, we actually have to pack up our stuff. Like, we are in the Arctic. We're above the Arctic Circle now. We need this to survive. So we got to take our stuff. So she keeps pointing the gun at the bear, and I go into frantic pack up mode and, carrying the camera at the same time. And somehow we have this very fast pack up into the canoe. I would say like less than 10 minutes, when normally it would take us about an hour in the morning. And off we go. And so no bear was injured, and nor were we. But actually, the funny part was that we took off, and then I looked down at my feet and I had like a full cup of coffee. There, somehow, through it all, we both had managed to bring our full cups of coffee and pack it into this canoe. So we actually, after the initial fright and relief, actually had a really big laugh at ourselves, like, because it's like, what is that? What does that say about our priorities? But anyway, it came to it. It was a good resolve, but not for Julian, of course. And that part of the journey was dangerous. There was another man, a younger man behind us, who drowned just like 5 kilometers behind us. Again, we had just heard that we might bump into someone, because someone had let us know that, hey, there's another car. And then he drowned. So we only heard of 2 other boats, and in both cases there were fatalities. So, I mean, it does emphasize, it's beautiful, and I'm not saying don't do that section. I just say to people, when you want to go off into the wild like that, you have to accept responsibility for yourself and be prepared. And so, Louisa was afraid of the bears, so we prepared. We got a gun license, and we learned how to shoot this firearm, and we had it with us. And even though she was right, because by having it, it protected us, and it actually protected the bear. And my big concern for us was, it's the Arctic Ocean. Our survival time is zip if we fall into the water, and we're in an open canoe, right? So we wore dry suits the whole time, so that a dry suit is, you can still move around in them quite easily, but you wear clothes underneath them. So in the event you end up in the water, you don't get hypothermia as quickly. And when you do get to shore, underneath this outfit are dry clothes. So therefore your lighter or whatever you have on you is also still of use to you. So we addressed our fears. We go, okay, what's our greatest fear? Okay, let's prepare for these fears. Now we can go on this journey. Do you know what I mean? Because we had accepted responsibility for the possible threats that could occur. And, knock on wood, that's why, in the 6 years I was out there, I mean, I had lots of bruises and sore backs, but I never broke a bone. I never required stitches. I never got hurt in any kind of serious way, and I never got sick.
Amazing.
And so, yeah.
So that cut you. I mean, one of the questions when I was preparing for this was, can anyone do this? And you've answered half of that, but still, I'd like to ask. And if I decided that I was going to do it, is it like, do you have to be a kind of superhuman-y kind of person, which I think you're touching on, or is it accessible?
I'm not. I was 50 when I left, and I am a filmmaker. I'm not an extreme athlete. I have been to places where I make films about people who are. Like when I went to Everest, I didn't summit Everest. I based myself at base camp and moved around the mountain. But I mean, and I spent 40 days on that mountain making a documentary. But, I followed those people. I'm not one of those people. And when I went to the high Arctic, it was the same way. I was embedded with 7 men, most of whom were Inuit, and 2 of them were Canadian Army men. And it was a secret military mission to do the most northern coastline of Canada, to raise a flag to tell Russia to go home, basically. And it's called This Land. And so, again, I was embedded with very talented people, and that's kind of how I survived that journey. But this one was different. But, here's the thing. I think when I left, I called it 500 days in the wild, but of course it takes me 1,862 days. And I think that's why I was safe. And honestly, Belle, I think the fact that I was 50 when I left is why I also was safe. Because on these extreme journeys, we don't always talk about it, but it's really all about self-care. So what I realized by day 10 was that I hadn't gone in 10 days what I thought I could do in 1. And of course, that negative little voice went off in my head, as it does sometimes for all of us, I think, which is, what are you doing? Like, you can't do this, you know? But my mom has always told me, when something feels overwhelming, if you can, sleep on it because it'll look different in the morning. And on day 10, I slept on it. And in the morning, I'm like, burn the schedule. Let go of that. Why is that even relevant? It isn't about finding the fastest way. I'm a storyteller. It's about finding the most meaningful way. And also, that turned out to be the safest way because you're always being responsive to. You can't impose a plan when you're in nature. You don't control the weather. You're fragile. And so you have to, adapt, honestly. So if it was storming, I stayed put is when I could, especially in the paddling. I'm not going to go out in 6-foot waves if I have a choice not to. I'll be patient. I wait for the water to calm down again. And honestly, I'm going to go farther in 1 hour in calm water than 3 days in rough water. So it's also about conserving your energy and being patient and just surrendering to something that you can't actually control. You can just be responsive and respectful and adapt. And I think that's why I made it. And I think the 20-year-old version of me or the 30-year-old version of me would not have done that. I would have been that jackrabbit, just go, 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 gotta go, go, go. And being 50 when I left and going through my 50s as I was out there, that wasn't it was like I said, like, it wasn't about conquering anything anymore. It was about surrendering to something. And that's what made the journey safer and also so much more meaningful. I show in the film, I fail in camping school miserably when I begin the journey. I lose tents, my shoes fall apart. I'm like, I'm failing camping school. But I don't quit. And I get better at it and better, and my body gets stronger, and I mentally get stronger. And, it is all about emotional regulation, self-care. You don't get up and go, oh, I gotta go. You get up, always have to feed yourself. You always have to properly pack your equipment. When that's all done, then you can go. You do as much as you can in a day, and then you've got to set up camp and do it all over again. So yeah, that's what it takes. And if you do it honoring you and what you're capable of, then anybody can do it. I think it's when you try to put yourself on somebody else's timeline that maybe you won't. And as you get older, the only thing you're racing towards is your death. So what's the rush?
How did you shoot a film and carry all of your gear?
I could be very self-sufficient in the canoe, as I said, for very long periods of time. Same with my mountain bike. And even when I was snowshoeing, because I was pulling a sled, and that too could carry a lot of gear. But when it was all on my back, not so much, right? Like every 4 weeks, I would need help with a resupply of food anyway. And, honestly, in that way, social media was actually, I'm not always for sharing all aspects of my life on that platform, but I did create an account for the film. And so people followed it. And the longer I was out there, the more people that followed it. And so I could reach out and say, I need this. And inevitably, more than one would offer to help, right? I can do it, So I would ask them to go pick up foods, and then I would be able to pay them a couple $100 when I saw them to pay them back for the foods that they purchased for me, So there wasn't one way. It was a plan that constantly I had to adapt. I'll also say to you that if I left on day one, I never left on day one with a plan for the whole trail. Because it was I had to do 487 trails. I just focused on one trail at a time. And that made it manageable.
So, Dianne, I don't want to stop this chat. I could talk to you forever about it, but I'm going to have to ask you the last question, which is the question that we ask all of our guests, and that is, what is your most bizarre travel experience? It doesn't have to be on the trail. I'm expecting you to blow my mind. Go on.
This is a difficult one and a very interesting question, I'll add, actually, which makes your show very unique. I've never been asked this question in my life, actually. So I realized, oh wow, there's so many ways of approaching this question. There's like the paranormal, bizarre. But what I'm going to settle on is actually it's from my journey up in the high Arctic. And so when you're traveling, I traveled for almost 2 months, I guess it was, out on, a lot of it was on the frozen Arctic Ocean up near the North Pole, where the sea's frozen. So how do you get your drinking water, right? Everything is salt water, frozen salt water. So I was traveling with some Inuit elders, and the way that they get their drinking water is the same way that they've been getting their drinking water for thousands and thousands of years. And that is they would find frozen into the frozen Arctic Ocean, huge icebergs. And they would climb up with these spears onto the top of these frozen icebergs, and they would chip off the blue ice, because the blue ice is the old ice that has had all the salt leached out of it over millennia. So we were doing this one day. We had stopped, and the elder was up there with his spear getting the blue ice for our drinking water. And all of a sudden, I see a raven. I'm like, how in the earth can there be a raven up here? We are so far from land, so far from any trees, like thousands of miles from a tree. How is this raven up here? And so I went over and I asked one of the Inuit men I was traveling with. I'm like, Roger, how is this raven here? And he goes, oh, raven. That means there's a polar bear really close by. The raven up here follows the polar bear and eats the leftover kill of the polar bear. And so, well, that was a wow, awe moment for me. It was just this idea that this raven could exist up here in the high Arctic, up, so far north, near the North Pole, and survive with this symbiotic relationship with the polar bear. Yeah, I would say that was an awe moment, a bizarre moment, but also like a large awe moment in my travels.
Absolutely. Oh, that's just incredible. Your visions and what you've seen and what you're bringing to the film are they're just. So, Dee, thank you so much for joining us. We've absolutely loved having you on the podcast, and good luck with the continuation of 500 Days in the Wild and with whatever your new next adventure chooses to be.
Thank you so much, Belle.
That was Canadian adventurer and filmmaker Dianne Whelan, and you can follow her on Instagram at 500 Days in the Wild.
Our tip this week is where to go to find Australia's best towns, and who doesn't love a regional Aussie town with its great bakeries, breweries, artisan wares and friendly locals.
Yes, so Australian Traveller has launched its 100 best Aussie towns. And don't worry, we're not going to run through the whole list of the 100, but which we will put a link to in the show notes. But we're going to give you the top 10.
So the best Aussie town is Bicheno in Tasmania. Ooh, and this is such a great one because Bicheno is a magnet for seafood lovers thanks to its fishing port. It's part of the East Coast Whale Trail, and there are plenty of whale watching spots from May to December along this 3-kilometre coastal walkway. And it's a short drive from Douglas Apsley National Park and the Freycinet National Park as well. And in second place, Kirstie is back up in your other heartland, which is Queensland. Port Douglas is the premier gateway to both the Great Barrier Reef and the Daintree Forest, and it has plenty of luxury resorts, award-winning dining, and the iconic palm-fringed 4 Mile Beach. And if you can get up there for its food festival, I would highly recommend it.
Yes, and I'm very excited about that because I'm going to Port Douglas next month, so stay tuned because you can hear me talk all about it when it drops on the pod, actually after our winter series. New South Wales Byron Bay came in third. This is a popular coastal town that was known for its surfers and alternative lifestyle in days gone by, but it's now a lot more refined with luxurious beach houses, and all that refinement was helped by celebrities living there like Chris Hemsworth, who owns a $50 million eco mansion. Fourth was Port Fairy in Victoria, which is a fishing village at the end of the Great Ocean Road. It's the last destination on Victoria's famed shipwreck coast, and it's got wide streets with little 19th century cottages and great Norfolk pines and some old stone churches. And interestingly, more than 50 buildings there have been classified by the National Trust.
Oh my goodness, I love Port Fairy so hard. I'm there at least once a year doing a story about fabulous accommodation and food, and best potatoes ever come from near there. There you go. In fifth place, back in New South Wales, get to Guernsey here, it was Bowral, only 90 minutes from Sydney in the Southern Highlands. So here, of course, you're going to find yet more fabulous restaurants, cool climate wineries, and a big dose of country scenery. And it is also the heartland of the famed cricket legend Don Bradman. We are going all over the country on this one because Broome comes in next to the quaint town at the gateway of the Kimberley, with that stark contrast of colours that only WA can bring. Deep blue oceans, red dirt that stays with you long after you leave, and we're not just talking about emptying it out of your boots. There are dinosaur tracks revealed in the beach's red rocks during the low tide. And that is a good enough reason for me to go. But otherwise, a stone's throw from McLaren Vale, Wollonga is the next top town on the list. Farmers markets, wineries, historic buildings that are doubling as art galleries. What is not to love about Wollonga?
And rounding out the top 10 are Eagle Bay in WA, the place for Western Australia's rich and famous. I seem to be getting all of those ones to mention, don't I? Lucky me. With world-class whining, dining, surfing and diving. And it's a little over 3 hours drive south of Perth and lined with opulent beachfront holiday homes belonging to WA's most affluent. And you're just a short hop from the Margaret River too. And that's followed by Noosa in Queensland, which is another playground of the rich and famous, another one of my favourite places to go. It's also renowned, not that I'm rich or famous, but hey, one day. Renowned for its stunning national park of the same name as the town, surfing and boutique shops, and don't miss whale watching the Everglades, and of course hiking in that stunning national park where, if you're in luck, you might even see whales as you walk. And you can head back to episode 111 or the summer series replay on episode 129 to hear me talking about a recent trip I did to Noosa, and we will put a link in the show notes. Next week, I'm chatting to Carol Rosenblatt, a freelance journalist, copywriter, small group tour operator, and the author of interactive travel site Drop Me Anywhere, where, get this, readers choose where she travels. We talk about the many countries she's visited, including her current hometown of Budapest, her highs and lows of travel as a solo woman, and how she came up with the idea to set up a blog where you choose where she goes.
That just sounds absolutely insane. Like I was going to say amazing, but just insane. Can't wait to hear that one. And we'd love it if you followed us on socials. You'll find us at The World Awaits podcast on Instagram, Facebook and LinkedIn. Feel free to drop us a line at hello@theworldawaits.au, or if you are listening to this episode, please give us a rating or a review. That's a wrap for The World Awaits this week. Click to subscribe anywhere you listen to your favourite pods.
Thanks for listening. See you next week.